Star Trek will not be presented tonight, so that we may bring you the following special program.
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners.
Terrificon, Connecticut's biggest Comic Con, is back at the Mohegan Sun Expo Center in Uncasville, Connecticut on August 16th through the 18th. See your favorite stars from TV and film and shop for comic books, toys and memorabilia. With top creators from Marvel and DC, costume contests with prizes, and so much more. Tickets on sale now at terrificon.com.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. It's time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. Very excited to welcome Greg Cox to Word Balloon. Not only one of the best of the Star Trek novelists, but also a guy that has done his share of other network tie-ins as far as novelizations, or not novelizations, but original stories based on TV IPs and comic book IPs as well. But Greg, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure, man. I'm excited for this new book you got coming up. A new original series Star Trek story, Lost to Eternity. And in the cover, we see Kirk, Spock, and Saavik, which is interesting. And I know there's a nod here to Star Trek 4. I'll let you reveal as much as you want plot-wise about Lost to Eternity.
Oh, so, well, the book, which, by the way, comes out literally next week on the 23rd. So the timing here is perfect. It's an odd book in that there are actually, it's alternates between three different time periods. I actually have notes here. There is a storyline set in 2024, i.e. now, which involves a true crime podcaster trying to solve the mysterious disappearance of a certain whale expert back in 1986 or so, whatever happened to Gillian Taylor. There is a storyline set in 2268 during the original 5-year mission, which has Kirk and company trying to track down a Federation scientist with top secret information who has gone missing under suspicious circumstances. And there is a story line set in 2292, the movie era, focusing on Saavik, where Saavik ends up playing a crucial role in trying to establish diplomatic relations with a very reclusive alien race. And without giving too much away, these three apparently different storylines all kind of converge and intersect in what will hopefully be, surprising in unexpected ways. So yeah, you've got modern day 5-year mission and movie era, and the movie era is very much focused on Saavik, and the 2022-24 plot line is very much, whatever happened to Gillian Taylor,
I like it, man. No, that's great. Truly, man. I've always felt this way about you, and I was telling you about some of my other favorite Trek novelists off the air, like Mike Friedman and Robert Greenberger. And I didn't mention this before, but I always thought Peter David had a great handle on his Star Trek novels. And you guys, to borrow a phrase of Donald Fagen, the Steely Dan lyricist, that in his own album, The Nightfly, said, well, walking between the raindrops. And I think a lot of your novels very, very well fit in to adding things to canon without damaging what has been there before. And I understand, and I'm sure there's always been a big vetting procedure with Paramount and everything. But you tell me, yeah, how has that been throughout writing these books? How
Well,
difficult has that been? Yeah.
but anytime you do a media tie-in, and this is not just a Star Trek thing, it is a collaborative process. I mean, I didn't invent Star Trek. I didn't invent, Sophic. I didn't, write Star Trek 4. So it's very much a collaborative process. The way it usually works, and again, this is pretty much standard where you're doing Batman, the Librarians, X-Files, Buffy, Xena, you name it. And I have. I usually start out by writing like a 12, 15-page outline. I send it to my editor at Simon & Schuster for their comments. We go back and forth a little bit. They then forward it on to CBS. They come back with their comments, suggestions. You can't do this. You can't do this. How about you do this? And we go back and typically we go back and forth a little bit until we come up with a plot we all like, at which point I then get a contract and I go to work. And then later, after I have written the whole book and there's a manuscript, I run it by my editor, who then runs it by CBS to any last minute, changes and corrections. So, and sometimes stuff goes through very smoothly. Sometimes, they've got their opinions and I have my opinions. But like I said, honestly, you kind of have to check your ego at the door, because if you're going to write Daredevil or Star Trek or whoever, like I said, you're playing in somebody else's sandbox. And at this point, honestly, when it comes to Star Trek, I mean, Pocketbook, Simon & Schuster, etc., had the license since TMP, the first movie. So it's a fairly well-oiled machine at this point, and I know what I can get away with and what I can't, and we have a very good working relationship. Because we were talking about this at the risk of belaboring how old I am. I've been doing this for over 30 years now. I started, my first Star Trek novel came out in 1995, which is to date it is the first season of Deep Space Nine.
Ha!
So I got recruited and joined the stable, as it were, when the DS9 book program was gearing up, which shows you just how long I've been at this.
I was going to ask.
At this point, like I said, I have a very good working relationship with CBS, with the good people at Simon & Schuster, Pocket Books, etc. But this book in particular, I don't remember. Like I said, I came up with the idea. I sent the outline in. There were some delays because of the pandemic, but as with everything, and there wasn't a whole lot of back and forthing or arm wrestling about it. The whole process was fairly smooth.
That's cool. So was it a DS9 book? Was that your first book back in the day?
Yes, it was called Devil in the Sky. It was a collaboration with John Gregory Betancourt. We wrote the book together. And yeah, we got recruited to write that book before DS9 even aired. So we started writing that book before we'd seen a single episode. What happened was basically DS9 was in the works. John Ordover, who was the Star Trek editor at the time, realized he kind of needed to expand the stable to accommodate the ever-growing number of Star Trek book lines. And that's how I got my foot in the door. John and I go way back. We were both assistant editors of Tor Books together. And he knew I was a hardcore Trekkie. And he said, hey, Greg, there's this new thing coming up. And hey, as it happened, John Betancourt, there's too many Johns in this story. Let's just call him Betancourt. Betancourt and I had previously collaborated on 2 Batman projects, which Ordover had read and liked. So he said, hey, you and Betancourt, I liked your Batman stuff. You want to do this Devil in the Sky thing? And they sent us the Bible for Deep Space Nine. They sent us the script for the first episode, and we got to work. Fortunately, by the time, midway through the book, the show debuted, and I could actually watch a few episodes. And of course, I was reading everything I could about the show in Starlog magazine, if you remember that. But yes,
of course.
I got my foot in the door because they needed more writers to accommodate Deep Space Nine. And same story with Voyager. I wrote one of the first Voyager books, and again, I started writing that book on the basis of the Bible and the pilot script because once again they wanted to get the books up and running fast rather than sort of have a time lag between the shows debuting.
Have you read or have you written every iteration of Star Trek? I know you've done next gen books, but also and your Q miniseries. Have you done Enterprise?
I've done a lot of them. I never did Enterprise. I have yet to do Enterprise, and I have not done any of the newer shows yet.
Okay, yeah.
But no, I've done my DS9. I've done my Voyager. I've done a fair amount of TNG, and in fact, I'm still occasionally. These days, I also write for the official Star Trek magazine, Star Trek Explorer. I write short fiction for them, and I've written a couple of Voyager stories for them, a bunch of TNG stories for them. So I'm going to have to do an Enterprise story just to get that square on my bingo card done.
Absolutely, man.
I should pitch them a Discovery story just to finish.
Okay, okay. I'll confess, Greg.
Mm.
I was telling you what I like as far as the new stuff. That I'm such a big Prodigy fan. I don't know, man. I like Strange New Worlds a little bit better. Discovery to me was, frankly, in my opinion, a mess. And while it was well intentioned, I think it was too different. And also, I understand they wanted to really focus on Michael Burnham as a lead character, and I understand that. But just the nature of Star Trek stories are a team working together. And for us, please, Greg.
We debate this for hours. Indeed, obviously, we've been debating Discovery for 7 years now.
Yes.
I quite like Discovery. What I like about it is that it, as I say, Discovery was the show I wanted Enterprise to be. A fresh, new 21st century take on Star Trek that didn't feel like warmed over Berman era Trek. I like that it was different and strange. It was arguably the first. I mean, I like Voyager, I like Enterprise, but they were both. DS9 was arguably the last Star Trek show before Discovery that really tried to kind of, rock the boat and.
Absolutely.
It seemed like after you found that Voyager was a wonderful character. I enjoy. I've written Voyager, but it was TNG again. And then Enterprise was kind of hyped as, it's going to be new, it's fresh, it's grittier, it's set in an earlier, less utopian era. And again, Enterprise has many virtues for it, but this is just. And at this point, it was like 2001, and Enterprise looked just in terms of the pacing, the writing, the story structure. It could have aired in 1987. I wanted something new, fresh, and different, and that was Discovery. I will also argue, and this is I have to be careful not to rant because, again, we've all been ranting about this I have lots of pre-recorded rants because we've all been debating this stuff on panels for 7 years now, is that there's a tendency, one of my pet peeves because I'm old and I grew up on TOS, is there's a tendency to sort of treat the 90s stuff as the gold standard default to Star Trek, which I bristle at because I'm old. And I would point out that the idea that Star Trek is supposed to be an ensemble show, and you're supposed to have, is kind of a '90s idea.
Yes,
that's not TOS. I mean, most of the arguments about why does Burnham? Why is it all about Burnham? Why don't we learn more about? I'm sorry, there was never a Uhura-centric episode, on TOS.
Right.
TOS had 3 names in the credits. At first, in fact, it was just 2. If you watch the opening credits, so that, it's Shatner, Nimoy, and eventually Kelly, and everybody else is in the fine print at the bottom, at the credits. So when people say Star Trek is supposed to be an ensemble show, and why is it always about Burnham? I said, well, you could apply the same argument to TOS. Why is it always about Spock and Kirk? And
I get it.
I don't mean to badmouth TNG or anything because I love TNG, I've written TNG, but there are lots of different flavors. And I find, and this is part of my pet peeve, I got a whole rant on this, when people say something isn't like Discovery isn't TOS, something isn't Trek, or this new movies aren't Trek, or the Kelvin movies aren't Trek, I find 9 times out of 10, what they mean is it isn't like TNG. And again, I love TNG, but it ain't the gold standard to which all Star Trek shows, past and present, must be compared. I grew up on TSS. Like I said, I grew up on Wild Wild West. No one. Wait, why does Columbo always solve the crimes?
But
why does Perry Mason always have? I want.
well, but Greg,
I grew up
that
in 60s
was
TV, and the idea that Michael Burnham is the star. Why is the star of the show the star of the show always struck me as kind of weird.
no, I absolutely respect all that, but I also would counter argue and say that was the nature of 60s through even through the 80s with shows like Fred Dreyer's show Hunter, where number one on the call sheet is the person that's going to solve the crime or save the day. But I did feel like Next Generation got its stride when Michael Piller came in the writing staff and is like, why must the conflict always come from outside the crew and it's the alien race? Let's have a Worf story. Let's have a Deanna Troi story. And I think it was an evolution, and the way that not only in Star Trek, but really TV in general, when you had ensemble casts. And I do think there was just a different attitude, because you're absolutely right. God, Daniel Boone, Fess Parker, and all those other, and like you mentioned, Wild Wild West. It was Robert Conrad. I mean, Ross Martin was there.
So, like
And,
I said,
well,
why is the star of the show being treated like the star of the show always kind of? And that may be.
I'm with you.
I grew up on 60s TV.
Sure. Well, and me too.
The other night I was watching Adam West Batman, and gee, why aren't there episodes about Aunt Harriet? Why don't we find out more about where's the Chief O'Hara episode?
No, but again,
I mean, I love that Strange New Worlds. My God, we finally have Euro-centric episodes. And one likes to think that if TOS had run 5 years, maybe we could have fleshed out Sulu. But when people complain that we haven't learned enough about Detmer, I said, well, how much do we really learn about? Euro didn't even get a first name,
Well, but that's the thing, man. I mean, again, all the action, or a lot of the action, happens on the bridge, and it took 5 years for a lot of these characters before it's like, oh, I mean, Detmer, at least we got a little bit earlier in, I think, season 3. But Reese, the Asian...
There's different formats, and I resist the idea that Star Trek has to fit into... I mean, today, there are still shows. I mean, Monk is the Monk show. Poker Face, which I love, which is basically a modern-day version of Columbo. It's
Absolutely.
Natasha Lyonne's show. No one complains about why is Natasha Lyonne solving the mystery every week, And there are advantages to an ensemble cast. I'm not saying the ensemble casts are bad. And there's an advantage to star-focused show. The idea that, okay, everything has to be an ensemble show and we have to reject the old episodic, we can't watch Monk or Poker Face or...
But those are different shows, man. I mean, again, Star Trek is a team working together. But no, by the way, I love this discussion, Greg. I absolutely love this.
Different flavors. I push back when people get too prescriptive about Star Trek is, what Star Trek is. And like I said, I'm told today is actually Grumpy Old Man Day nationally.
Is it really?
But my tendency is when people say Star Trek is, they almost mean Star Trek equals TNG, And that was one level of it. I think, well, maybe I like to think, I think there's DS9. Star Trek comes in a glorious number.
Sure.
There's Lower Decks. I mean, Lower Decks. There's Prodigy. Star Trek comes in lots of different flavors, and maybe it's because, like I said, I'm a writer. I get pushy when people say, "Oh, you have to do this and you can't do this." Star Trek is whatever I can get away with. I'm going to get in trouble for saying that, but
No.
But
well, Stanley
you have to be aware of the audience, and there are certain, But I resist Star Trek getting. Obviously, writing Star Trek is different from writing Daredevil than writing Conan the Barbarian. But I resist trying to put Star Trek too much. Okay, every Star Trek show must have a security officer, and the engineer must have a. I like the variety. Like I said, the one problem is, I think with the '90s era, by the end there was a certain sameness that was coming into it, and I like that Discovery rocked the boat, that DS9 rocked the boat, and indeed that TNG was different from TOS.
Absolutely,
the
and
idea
also
that Star Trek must all hit the same story beats, and Star Trek is about teamwork as opposed to a star. Hey, I mean, we're going to get Section 31, and I'm hoping for, like La Femme Nikita in space. That's going to be a very different take on Star Trek.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. I don't know. Again, man, I would if the people that wrote Prodigy
Yeah.
were writing live action Star Trek, I would feel a lot better about it. And that also goes with the Pike Show. Lower Decks is funny, and I think it's evolved in very positive ways since it began. But absolutely, listen, man,
But
I love
Lower Decks proves you can do Star Trek as a screwball comedy. So
what's that?
Lower Decks kind of proves, like I said, not getting too prescriptive. Who would have thought, oh, we're going to do Star Trek as a screwball comedy? But it works, and it's wonderful.
It does work.
I find Lower Decks delightful.
Yeah, again, I didn't like how Mariner was the solution to everything in the first season. She reminded me of, as an old TV fan, Sergeant Bilko. She was like the Sergeant Bilko of Star Trek, where she wants to coast. She doesn't really want to be a senior officer in any way, and is trying to find the ways to just kind of enjoy herself while staying in the background and stuff,
Weirder analogy, going back here further, she kind of reminded me of the hero of like an old classic 1930s screwball comedy, who Boimler is the sort of, like Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn in Bringing Back Baby. You've got these sort of, chaotic force of nature who just, go back and watch, Ball of Fire with Barbara Stanwyck. I'm really aging myself here, aren't I? But
no, these are great movies. I'm with you.
Yeah, but like I said, I'm thinking, oh, I know this structure. This is Bringing Up Baby of Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant, and this
funny.
Is, these are or What's Up Doc with Ryan O'Neal and Barbara
I
Streisand.
just watched that 2 weeks ago. It was on Turner, and I watched it on
Ryan O'Neal is Boimler, and Barbara Streisand is Mariner. Okay, I know
that's fantastic. That's fantastic. Well done, man. Well, and again, we'll get back to your stuff, but I love that we politely disagree about this, and that's fantastic.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, one thing I point out at this point, Star Trek consists of 13 different movies, at least a dozen TV series, and several hundred novels, comic books, games. It's statistically unlikely that any of us would all like all of them equally.
Yeah, but I mean, I certainly did.
But everyone's going to have their favorite flavor of ice cream. Star Trek comes in different flavors, and how boring would it be if Star Trek was vanilla every week?
No, and I'm with you there. And again, hey, man, I'm 59, and I have vague memories of my parents watching the original series during the actual original run. I was a child of the syndicated show in the early 70s, well before Star Wars came along, and could not wait in December of 79 to get on my bicycle and ride and watch the motion picture. I mean, I'm just always.
My entire college science fiction club and I took a road trip to Seattle, which was like 100 miles, to see TMP on opening night. So
wonderful.
Yeah, I was in college when TMP came out, but no, my whole science fiction club, we like rented a van or something and drove to Seattle from Bellingham, Washington, which is like roughly 100 miles, to see it on opening.
Well, as we talked about classic movies, my buddy and I did the same for the Hitchcock revival in the 80s, Rear Window, and those movies. And then also, my friend and I were talking this morning, The Manchurian Candidate, that we made the pilgrimage to downtown Chicago, about 2 hours away. So I hear you, man. No, I'm with you on that. Well, let's get back to some of your books. My God, the trilogy, the classic trilogy that really fleshed out Khan's story and the eugenics wars, and then ultimately to the final chapter of To Reign in Hell. What a great story, and again, Greg, you did something that, I'm sorry, modern Star Trek didn't do. You kept, and why wouldn't you back then? But we got the eugenics wars in the 90s, as Spock and Kirk discussed in Space Seed, and you walked between the raindrops. You gave us a compelling, real-world, almost eugenics war, Cold War story set when it should be, and it made both real-world sense and Star Trek sense, and I have to hand it to you. It's a wonderful 3-volume story.
Well, I will say with all humility that, honestly, of all my Star Trek books, those are the ones that I hear the most about from fans. When I'm online, it's like, oh, Greg, are you the guy who wrote the Khan books? It's never, are you the guy who wrote Devil in the Sky? Or whatever. Many, but I'm not complaining. Those I will say, of all the books I've written, those are the ones that probably seem to have made the most impression. When I go to conventions, and I'm going to another one in 2 weeks, those are the ones people come up and talk to me about more than any other. They are being morbid. I'm sort of morbidly resigned to the fact that if and when I finally depart this mortal coil, long down the road, my obituary will say something like Greg Cox, author of the Khan books and many other Star Trek novels. But
How many total?
But I'm not complaining. It's very gratifying because that all these years later, I still run into people who remember those books fondly, reading those books, and people want to talk to me about those books. So that's just what you want,
Yeah.
I have, wow, that at this point, and I wrote those books, back in the late 90s. And indeed, I think I wrote, I think I crossed into the 2000s when I was writing the book. And people, like I said, those are the books that, of all my Star Trek books, people remember most fondly. And thank you for, I get lots of kind words and positive reinforcement about it. And it's great because, wow, people, all these years, people still read those books and like them. And it's funny when you mentioned the choice. I remember talking about this with my editor at the time, who was John Ordover again. I gotta give John credit. We kind of realized there were two ways to go at because we had the problem. I used to joke that the eugenics wars are the sucking chest wound of Trek continuity because the 1990s had come and gone. That there were two ways to approach it, and they're both valid. We could have just tossed real history out the window and written a really kick-ass apocalyptic, alternate history universe with entire cities being destroyed. And there were writers who could have done a really good job of that, and you could have had a really good books about it. Or we could try to somehow squeeze the eugenics wars into the 1990s that we all actually were living through. And at the time being, that seemed more fun. To take more of an X-Files approach, and okay, here's what was really going on behind the screens. So that's the way we went. The other way would have been a valid approach, and I can think of lots of good writers who could have read great military science fiction novels about the eugenics wars. We went for trying to, how do we squeeze it into the same world? 90s we went through with Bill Clinton and the OJ trial and Nancy Kerrigan and Tanya Harding and all that. I joke that Americans didn't notice the eugenics wars because we were all watching the OJ trial at the time. But yeah, that was the approach, was to approach it as the X-Files, and there was lots of stuff going on behind the scenes and the full story. And they weren't actually labeled the eugenics wars until future historians down the road kind of looked back at, the eugenics wars era, and connected all the dots, and stuff got declassified, etc.
Certainly.
And indeed, as I believe Spock says to Kirk in Space Seed, many records are spotty, and there are still many strange unanswered questions about that era. And well, we ran with that. Okay.
That's great. Well, and also to include, because well, again, I'll hear your opinion, because it's not the only book you've written that has included Gary Seven and Roberta Lincoln.
Yeah.
And I love that you put them in that story. It fits chronologically, but also I love Assignment Earth, and I am intrigued by what we didn't get. And Robert Lansing is one of my favorite 60s through 80s character actors. He's always compelling to me. Loved him on The Equalizer, for example. And it's just great, thinking about fresh-faced Terry Garr in such an early role as Roberta Lincoln. So clearly, how did that element come into the Khan story?
Well, there's a funny story about that. This is a true story. I love Assignment Earth too. And I have always felt cheated that we never got to hear about the further adventures of... thank you. of
Another fine, and there's the other example. Absolutely, Assignment Eternity that Greg wrote.
we've always, you know, I'm disappointed we never got to see those further adventures. So indeed, high on my to-do list was to bring back Gary Seven, Roberta Lincoln, and Isis when I started writing for Star Trek. In fact, I think it was one of the very first ideas I pitched to Pocketbooks. It ended up, for logistical reasons, being the fourth one. But here's the thing. At the end of that book, which I brought back Gary Seven and Roberta to be Kirk again, it's a sequel to, Assignment Earth. I threw in as an Easter egg a line where Spock says something about, I've done more research, and we have to return them to their own era, because in the book they come forward to the 23rd century. Because it turns out that Gary Seven and Miss Lincoln are instrumental in the overthrow of Khan Noonien Singh. And here's the funny part. I swear to God, that was just meant to be kind of a fun punchline, an Easter egg. I had no intentions of telling that story. It was just kind of like at the end of Assignment Earth, Spock kind of has done. We have to send them back to their time because they're instrumental in overthrowing Khan Noonien Singh during the eugenics wars. And that was an Easter egg. I turn in the manuscript, I get a phone call from Ordover, my editor. He goes, Greg, you have to write those books.
Hilarious.
I swear to God, this was not my sneaky multi-plan.
Fantastic.
It was John Ordover, who actually read that little, punchline zinger I threw in at the end of the book and says, Greg, I wasn't planning to. Are you planning to do a sequel? Okay. And before I knew it, I had a 2-book contract and we were off and running. Okay. So yeah, it all started because I threw that in as an Easter egg at the end of my previous Gary Seven book. Little did I know I would then end up writing Khan novels for the next several years. So,
I don't know. And again, if you can't say, I respect that. But obviously, we've been hearing that. Oh God, now I'm blanking on the great Star Trek movie director that has been prepping the Khan podcast prequel
Nicholas
story.
Meyer.
That's right, Nicholas Meyer. Thank you.
Yeah.
And it sounds like at least the early indications are it's set on SETI Alpha 5 after Kirk maroons or exiles Khan to that planet. But I wonder if are there elements of your novels that are going to show up in this proposed podcast series?
Honestly, I'm not involved with that at all. I wouldn't know. I would be pleasantly surprised because, as you know, stuff does occasionally, leak upstream from the novels. Nyota, Ayura, Hikaru Sulu. Una comes from a TOS novel that me and a few other guys wrote a few years back. But, it's hard to say. Like I said, I'm not expecting it. Indeed, there's already been at least one graphic novel that presented an alternate version of Khan's exile on CDLP5. So we may get a third version from Nicholas Meyer. And I'm fine with that because, again, I didn't invent Khan. I didn't invent CDLP5. I'm not proprietary to it. And even if I was proprietary about my plotline, for God's sakes, it's Nicholas Meyer. He made Wrath of Khan. If anybody has the rights to, overwrite my book,
Sure.
My books were based on his movie. So,
100%.
Hard for me to tell Nicholas Meyer, you have to follow. Yeah, you can.
Oh, no. Yeah, of course. Of course.
I have been following this. I see reports, but no one has ever talked to me about it. I will be curious to see what happens. I imagine there'll be some overlap because there's certain plot beats you're going to hit. It was funny, I think IDW or somebody did a graphic novel a few years ago. There was also a different alternate take. And it was not an adaptation. I remember there was some confusion because people, oh, Greg, are they adapting your novel? No, this is a different take on Khan, same period of time, different. But there's certain plot beats you're going to hit, because we all know Marlo's going to die. We all know that the planet's orbit is going to switch. So there were bits that resembled my novel, but I think that's just us all working from the same source material and having to, okay, we got to get the C.D. Eels in there. We've got to get, Marla is got to die tragically. Everything is going to go to shit on C.D. Eels 5,
Yeah,
So,
absolutely, man.
So I'm curious to see, last I heard it was going to be a podcast. But yeah, Nicholas Meyer. I love Nicholas Meyer's work. My 3 favorite Star Trek movies are Wrath of Khan, Voyage Home, and Undiscovered Country, all of which he was involved with. I've read all of his Sherlock Holmes novels. I love Time After Time with a mad passion. I was a huge Time After Time fan before I saw Wrath of Khan. So
Sure.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, I really love Nicholas Meyer's take on Star Trek, and I mean his work in general. Like I said, I hear he's got a new Sherlock Holmes novel coming out shortly, and yes, I will be.
Wow, because I know he just released one a couple of years ago too.
Yeah, the one about the Pharaohs, the mystery of the Pharaohs, and then there was the.
Yep.
Yeah, he's written I've lost track, 7 or 8 of them, and
he's a great.
Someone has posted there's a new one coming out. Like it's been announced, it's on Amazon. I can't remember the title, but yes, he's got a new Sherlock Holmes novel out, and I will definitely read it.
No, I remember as a kid reading 7% Solution well before the movie.
Oh yeah,
and being blown away. And anytime there's a good Sherlock Holmes news story or adaptation, they have me at hello. So I can appreciate that. Another crossover that you did, and I haven't had, and forgive me, Greg, I haven't had a chance to read it yet. But No Time Like the Past, where we have Jim Kirk and 7 of 9 actually. In the same story, and
yes.
I haven't read it yet, but I hope to, or I will, and certainly I hope that this isn't the only time we ever talk. I'm happy to have you back when you have something new. But what can you tell me about that?
I will confess that I have not read every single Star Trek novel either. There's only like
Sure.
Back in the 90s, we were putting out 2 a month, so
yes, you were absolutely, man.
But that book that was fun. I'm still kind of in shock that CBS let me do that. And actually, to give credit where it's due, I believe that was Margaret Clark, who was another pocketbooks editor, who suggested adding 7 and 9 to that storyline. I had a plot line that involved a mysterious stranger from the future who comes to the 5-year mission era, and much confusion about not temporal prime directives, and she knows the future and can't she? And we weren't quite sure who the character was supposed to be. In fact, honestly, okay, I think this is an open secret now. That book is a rewrite of a Kelvin novel that got, for various reasons, spiked.
Wow.
And I wrote a Kelvin novel based on the movies involving Spock Prime, as we call him, Leonard Nimoy character.
Certainly.
The fact that he was from the future and had all this future information. And for various reasons, that book didn't get published, mostly not because of the content of that book, but just because the Kelvin book line got shut down for a while for reasons. At a point, I'm like, waste not, want not. I'm going to rewrite this book as a TOS novel. But of course, I couldn't have Spock Prime running around talking. I couldn't have Leonard Nimoy talking to Zachary Quinto. So I was talking to Margaret. I said, well, who could I bring? Who could pay? I was thinking maybe Berlinghoff Rasmussen or somebody, And she goes, well, why not 7 of 9? I said, I can do that. Sure, I'll run it by CBS, see if it's okay. And oh, well. And that was great because I actually had felt 7 of 9 deprived up until then. Because my one and only Voyager novel was written back during the Kess era. So I'd never actually written 7 of 9, and I felt cheated. So, oh wow, and 7 of 9 meets Kirk. Okay, well, this is going to be a whole lot of fun. It actually ended up being much more rewriting, turning the Kelvin novel into I think maybe about a third of that book is my original Kelvin book.
Interesting.
Because a whole plot line with Spock and Uhura, the relationship had to go out the window, etc. The whole business about Vulcan being destroyed had to go out the window. So yeah, I think I salvaged about a third of my aborted Kelvin novel, and ended up, 2/3 of it ended up being, a whole new book. And yeah, it was much fun. I loved writing 7 of 9. 7 of 9 is one of my favorite Voyager characters. I love her attitude. Oh, I will tell you a funny story, and this is like the whole collaborative process. At that point, I had written something like 6 TOS novels in a row, so I'm like in TOS brain. And I'm writing a Voyager chapter for that book. Because book starts out with bookends in the Voyager era. Before, just for people who haven't read the book, 7 of 9, for reasons, falls backwards in time and finds herself stranded in the 23rd century in the time of Kirk, Spock, and all that gang. And the plot is about trying to get her back to her own time, about messing up history too much. But I'm writing the Voyager chapter, and I had 7 of 9 carrying her tricorder, which was slung on a strap over her shoulder. And Margaret had to write to me and say, Greg, that's a TOS thing, That's Voyager has, Voyager,
Tablet.
the tricorders are like this. They're not a big thing.
Right. Right.
And again, that's why the editorial process exists, because my brain I'd written 6 TOS books in a row. So naturally I was imagining a big clunky tricorder on a strap, and Margaret said, that's not how it works, Greg. It's magically by Velcro to her suit or something. So fine, so I had to go rewrite that. But
there you go.
That was me having to go back and, hey, thanks, Matt. I see a comment.
Yeah, I was going to say, and we can talk about this. Finish your thought.
Yeah,
we'll talk
so
about
that I really enjoyed writing 7, and I've actually since written 7 again for the magazine, so that was fun.
Oh, wonderful. That's great, man. I hope they collect these short stories.
Oh, they are.
I got to be honest. A magazine priced at $20 or whatever it is, it's like, man, I don't know. I can't bite the bullet when I see the occasional existing magazines, and that's the price.
Give me just a second to step away here.
Please, that's hilarious. And yeah, everybody, Matt, we'll get into it after Greg makes his point.
The stories first appear in the magazine, but Titan has been regularly putting out hardcover collections of them.
I'm zooming in. I'm going to zoom in, Greg, so we can see them.
There's this one here, and there was this one here, and I believe there's a third one coming out in October, honestly. And yeah, you can see there's my 7 of 9 is on the back cover of this one.
Great.
So yeah, the way it works, the stories appear in a magazine first, and then there are, on a regular basis, they're collected and put out in hardcover collections.
Oh, great to hear. Wonderful to hear.
I think the third one comes out in October. And I believe I have a Dr. Pulaski story in.
Oh, wow.
That was appeared in the magazine.
That's great. That's great. Again, this is why I've loved the novels so much, because it's those kinds of opportunities to flesh out characters. I've read all the behind the scenes stuff, and I feel for Diana Muldaur, being a Star Trek Legacy actor.
This is where I get to brag shamelessly. And Matt, we have not forgotten you. I'm going to brag shamelessly. I wrote a Pulaski story, which was great. One of the fun things about doing the stories is I can do characters I've never written Pulaski. She's not in any of my next.
Okay.
So, when the magazine actually specifically asked me, again, collaborative process, could you write us a Pulaski story? Oh, that's cool. A friend of a friend who is a mutual friend actually showed Diana Muldaur my Pulaski story, and I have heard, secondhand via a friend of a friend that she liked my Pulaski story, or at least that's what.
Wonderful.
So my heart, closed. Yeah. So I'm aware that she was given a copy of it, and it got the Diana Muldaur, seal
of approval. Yeah. That's great, man. I've heard Lisa Klink talk about her short stories that she submitted to the magazine.
Yeah.
And it's another reason why I'm like, I got to read some of that stuff. So I can appreciate that. That's great.
And it is very collaborative. Sometimes I will pitch an idea to them. Hi, I want to write a Cyrano Jones story. And sometimes they'll come to me and say, hey, we're doing a Borg issue. Write us a 709 story. Or write us a Dixon Hill story or whatever. And yes, I got to write a Dixon Hill story, and that was much fun.
Oh, fun. That's great.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
I even wrote a Khan story. Believe it or not, I found a tiny sliver of Khan's life I had not covered. And I wrote a Khan story for the magazine. My first Khan story in like 17 years. It was weird going back and writing Khan again after all this time.
I bet. Wow, that's amazing. So how many total Star Trek books have you written?
I think at this point, in terms of novels, I think I'm at 9. I think the new one is number 19. I will, hey, play show and tell
Nice.
again. The new one is number 19, and then
Right.
miscellaneous short story collections, anthologies, novellas, and lots of short stories and stuff, and novellas and yeah.
No, that's amazing. Well, I wanted to, and forgive me, Greg, before I get into the superhero stuff you've done, um, have you written original novels and concepts? Have you, or has it been mostly adaptations of stuff?
I'll be honest. Up until now, mostly adaptations, and it's very funny. This question always comes up. So, Greg, tell me about your original stuff, and I'm always like, "What original stuff?" And the reason for this, honestly, and this is a very good problem to have. The tie-in stuff has kept me very busy. I will now hint. I'm not allowed to talk about it yet. During the pandemic, when I was locked at home and everything shut down, I wrote an original novel. I have sold it. It is probably going to come out in 2025.
Wonderful.
I'm not supposed to talk about it yet because it hasn't been announced yet. But yes, it only took me, 64 years. But yeah, the way it was, my New Year's resolution for years was always like, oh, I'm going to write an original novel this year. But then they come to me and say, hey, Greg, you want to write a Godzilla novel? You want to write a Batman novel? You want to write a Q trilogy? And that's, I'm not going to turn down work. And also, like I said, I'm enough of a fanboy. When they call and say, Greg, you want to write a Planet of the Apes book? You want to write a Godzilla book? Of course I'm going to say yes. But then another year goes by and, but like I said, honestly, the pandemic hit and I was stuck at home alone. I in quarantine, I wrote an original novel and we'll have to talk a year from now when that book comes out. Okay.
Please, that would be amazing. And while we mention the Q Continuum trilogy,
Yes.
we'll again put Matt's comment up. But now again, that's something that I haven't read yet. So tell me about that trilogy.
Okay, that honestly, just it's funny. The con books, like I said, are probably my most popular books, most celebrated. The Q ones are actually my best-selling books. If you look at the royalties, those Q, and I give all due credit to John Delancey and just how popular that character. It year after year, I'm still getting royalties on those Q books. And again, I got to give credit. That was the case of John Ordover again. My original, I've gone at this point, I've been around long enough. I've gone through a couple generations of Star Trek editors. Hi Ed, hi Margaret, hi Marco, hi John. But John called me up and said, "Hey Greg, I have an idea. I want to do a trilogy called the Q Continuum." And honestly, that's all he had was he thought the Q Continuum would be the great name for trilogy. So, write me a trilogy called the Q Continuum. I went home and I came up with an outline and I wrote it. And believe it or not, that book was my very first New York Times bestseller. The Q books.
Wow.
Yeah, I still remember the day that this was long ago. The fax came in from the New York Times over the fax machine, informing me that the Q trilogy was going to make the Times list, and I ran through the halls, at work, waving the fax in the air. That was fun. John asked me to write a Q series, and I wrote a big epic Q thing, where I went back and tried to do like the life story of Q in a way. We see him as a young man. We see him falling in with a bad crowd. I tried to drag in lots of the other sort of all-powerful entities out there. The god creature from Star Trek V pops up. Gorgon, the friendly angel, pops up. The creature from Day of the Dove pops up.
Wow.
And
Funny.
it was in some ways it was a reverse of Tapestry. Remember, Tapestry was the episode where Q takes the card on kind of a Ebenezer Scrooge,
Yes.
Carol voyage through his life. In the Q Continuum, Q, for reasons, has to take the card through sort of a survey of his life up until then. We get to see Q as a young, rebellious Q, and
Sure.
Q's mistakes and how Q became Q. So it was sort of, there were a couple of this gets insane, by the way, into the stuff that how a collaborative process works. Again, not complaining. At one point, I was going to get into how Q met Guinan for the first time. And I didn't have any firm ideas. I just thought that was something we should deal with. And I got a nice note from CBS saying, yeah, this was back in the 90s, we would prefer to keep that mysterious at this point in time. Which, again, that's their characters. They would say
Sure.
we want to keep our options open there. So okay, so
Right.
I didn't do that, but it gives you. I mentioned that just to give you a sense of how it's very interactive. Hey, can I explain how he meant Guinan? Don't do that. So yeah, and those was my first trilogy, I think. Before the Khan trilogy, it's been collected a few times, and yeah, and again, it's Q is a fun character to write. I love writing Q because you can let Q get snarky and snide and flip it in a way that the rather earnest TNG characters cannot generally. You can make snarky remarks about Riker and Worf, and
Oh God, yeah. Even that great. They did a couple. Nimoy and Delancey, Spock versus Q. Those were always cute when they came out. And no, I mean Q's a great random element that always disrupts the status quo and makes for interesting stories.
And I was always amazed that he never showed up in the TNG movies, just given how popular he is.
Especially the way this series ended, you really assumed he was going to show up, and it was interesting that not until the Picard series did he finally come back.
Yeah.
I was going to say did you, and forgive me if you did and I didn't remember this, I loved the pocketbook's continuity and really appreciated where all of you went with stories in the 2000s prior to Discovery, and that last 3-book series, Coda. Did you write one of those, Greg?
No, and honestly, what they call the Litverse, I wasn't really, at that point in time, honestly, the 24th century, as I put it, was in very good hands of my distinguished friends and colleagues. I mostly was busy, TOS is my first love. I was mostly sort of writing TOS books, which really, whereas I know that, the absence of any sort of Star Trek being a going concern allowed them to have a much more continuous, overarching storyline. I admit that whole era, I was off writing standalone TOS novels. As I joked, I was writing standalone TOS novels before the Litverse. I was writing standalone TOS novels. During the Litverse, I'm writing standalones. That really had no impact on me.
Okay.
Again, I was perfectly happy to let like I said, Dave Mack and Keith DeCandido and James Swallow, and these are all my friends, and I'm seeing them all in 2 weeks of the convention. They had a lot of fun. Took advantage of the fact that Star Trek was not a going concern for a decade or so on screen. That is
right
to do big story arcs. But again,
that's always,
and that's not. This kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning. That wasn't how 1960s TV works. So that's not how I write Star Trek. That's not how I write TOS novels.
No, I respect that. Absolutely.
What order should I read your TOS books in order? I said, aside from a few designated trilogies, like the Q trilogy, you read 1, 2, and 3, and the Khan books you read 1, 2, and 3. The Legacies trilogy, you read 1, 2, and 3. Honestly, you do not need to read any other. If you have seen Star Trek 4, you can read this book. Okay. If you know who Saavik is, you can read this book.
I get it. No, and again, truly, it has been your original series stories that it's gratifying, because I know people. They listen. I can't remember the episode count of the original series.
79.
There you go. Yes. So, and then the movies, and I can appreciate someone going, "Wow, it must be really challenging to write something that fits in and everything." And yet you manage to do it every time. You introduce new characters. Have you introduced crew members that you've gone back to in subsequent books?
Occasionally, not in a big way. Sometimes I do, just because, honestly, I'm lazy. You do need background characters. And
Sure.
Why should I invent, 10 new characters, a bunch of background
Every
characters?
time. Yeah.
I tend to sometimes, although honestly, my first instinct is often to grab somebody from the old show, because there was a lot. I've used Charlene Masters, who was the physicist from the Alternative Factor, a few times. I've gotten a lot of Martha Landon. who was Chekhov's girlfriend in The Apple, played by the
Oh, sure.
who played by
How about
Celeste Yarnell. I've actually used her quite a lot. I like partly it's I met Celeste at a convention once, and she was like, "Oh, you have to put me in your books." So I have, and in fact, Celeste is all over the new one. Okay, and
Oh, wow.
she gets to judo kick, so because she's got that great moment in The Apple when she's got her Emma Peel, kung fu moves. Yeah, I put Martha Landon is and sort of a case of, oh, I need a yeoman. I could make up, Rebecca Goodson, or I could just grab Martha Landon. I can grab
Sure.
Charlene Masters. Sometimes I'll make up somebody. I just need somebody. And in fact, I will say, with Lost to Eternity, again, I did end up borrowing a few characters from my previous book, Contest of Champions, because, well, okay, I need a red shirt security officer, and I had already created a guy for Contest of Champions. Why not bring him back? And,
No, I get it.
And like I said, I think Martha, so I brought him back. So, and yeah, I think I've used Martha Landon a couple times, and I tend to use Charlene Masters whenever I need an engineering person and Scotty is occupied elsewhere. Over at the engineering, Charlene Masters, I think she actually has like 2 lines in the new book. I was going to get her in, but she ended up, I think, it's a very, you may have gathered, it's a very complicated book. And Charlene Masters is getting like 2 lines at one point, but that's about it. Yeah. But better than just inventing, Rebecca Goodson, Okay.
I'm with you. No, I'm totally with you. By the way, honestly, Greg, having covered adaptation, first of all, comic books, but also novels that are adapted from existing IP, whether it's film or television. You get, as you well know, you got guys like now again I'm blanking. Shame on me. From Iowa, Max Allen Collins.
Oh yeah,
who is like a great adapter. And in fact, even Stanley said, "Have you ever worked with Peter David?" Peter David, beyond Star Trek, always interesting ideas that he would put in his adaptations. Have you ever participated? I love that they do this at San Diego every year. They have awards for adapted novels.
The Scribe Awards put out by the International Association of Media Tie-in Writers. In fact, they announced the nominees yesterday for this year's awards.
Okay, there you go.
So, yeah,
I love
it. Believe it or not, there is an organization, the International Association of Media Tie-in. We have our own trade organization. We have our own awards, the Scribes. James Reasoner, who's a Western author, just got the Life Achievement Award. And yeah, Max Allen Collins is heavily involved in that organization, and a few others. So yeah, I will brag. I got a Life Achievement Award a few years ago. So
hey, that's awesome, man. No, that's fantastic. I've talked about it with Marv Wolfman. I've talked about it with Jonathan Mabry. And Max, of course. No, I think that's great, man. And truly, much like comics, it's like, no, these are quality stories that if you love the intellectual property it's based on, here's another avenue to enjoy stories that they haven't gotten to in TV or film or whatever. And again, I think you guys and women do these things with serious care. And provide entertaining stories in the flavor of the IP that you're representing.
Well, part of it is, like I said, in my case at least, like I said, it's my not so secret is, I grew up on this stuff. I have a life on Fab. I would be standing in line to see the new Planet of the Apes movie, to see the new Godzilla movie, to see the new Star Trek movie, even though I wasn't writing this stuff for a living. And indeed, as we were kind of talking about this, earlier, in college, I went and saw the first movie. I will cop to camping out on the sidewalk overnight to see Return of the Jedi on opening day. Okay.
Attaboy.
I saw the first 3 Planet of the Apes movies at a triple feature one day. 6 hours of apes in one afternoon. Warped my brain forever. So.
Oh no, those back in the 70s. Yeah, man.
And which means that I have to do research. I have to sit down and watch The Wrath of Khan again. To make sure I get all the details right. Twist my arm. Oh no,
I'm with you.
I have to write a Batman book. I guess I'll have to sit down and read a bunch of Batman comics for research.
Were there
It's
are there
a tough
Batman
job, but someone has to do it, you know.
are there Batman writers that were your favorites that influenced your novels?
Let's see here. I should mention, I know it was a quick question about whether or not I've ever worked with Peter David.
Yes.
I know Peter well. We've gone to conventions together. Indeed, due to the vagaries of the alphabet, C after D, we often end up sitting next to each other at autographing signings. I don't think we've ever actually collaborated on a project per se. Although it is funny, Peter has written his own fair share of novels about Q, Q squared, Q in law. And I find that there's great confusion. People are always going, "Oh, I love your Q books. This is the one where he met lots." That's Peter, and I'm sure Peter must have people thanking, congratulating him on the Q continuum because,
Sure.
we both have written our fair share of Q novels, and I find people do get them mixed up sometimes, But I know Peter for a long, long time. We've hung out together at conventions for decades now. I don't think
I hope
we've
he's
actually collaborated.
Okay. I hope he's doing better. I know
And
that
we've
he's
done
been.
lots of panels together. Oh, we have, if we're going to count, collaboration, we have done innumerable Star Trek panels together.
Oh, I have no doubt.
And
I have no doubt.
superhero panels together, and we've both written Marvel Comics novelizations together. So we have much to talk about. So.
What was your first and I don't know if Batman, DC or Marvel was your first superhero novelization job, but when was it and what was it?
Well, okay, my first tie-in is I wrote a couple of Batman short stories for a couple of anthologies that came out around 1992 to coincide with the Tim Burton Batman Returns. In fact, that's how I got my I got a call in saying that DC desperately needed Penguin. I'm getting an echo here now. We desperately needed Penguin and Catwoman stories for an anthology. They were rushing into production, so a friend of a friend knew somebody at DC, got us a meeting, and I wrote a couple of Penguin and Catwoman stories, and they were published as the Further Adventures of Batman Volume 2 and 3. And for a while there, it was a pretty good deal. Every time they put out a new Batman movie, they would reissue those anthologies, and I would get a check. It's great.
Nice.
Later on, down the road, Byron Price was a company called Byron, had the Marvel license, and I wrote 2 Iron Man novels for him, and then I wrote an X-Men Avengers trilogy for him, and all of that led to my first novelization, which is when it came time for Daredevil, the Ben Affleck, Jennifer Garner Daredevil.
Oh wow!
They were looking for somebody to write Daredevil, and I'm told that one of my editors, Ginger Buchanan, said, "Oh well, you should get Greg. He's done Iron Man books, he's done X-Men books, he's done Avengers books," and that's how I got my first movie novelization. Was because Ginger recommended me for the job because I'd been writing Marvel Comics books for her. So my very first movie novelization was Daredevil. And since then, I did Ghost Rider, and more recently, I did The Dark Knight Rises, and I did Man of Steel.
Wow!
And I've written some original novels. Oh, I also went through a period where I novelized a whole pile of DC miniseries: Infinite Crisis, 52, Countdown, Final Crisis. Those were interesting projects where Greg, take a 52-part comic book miniseries and boil it down to a 300-word novel. I joke I wrote the Reader's Digest version of 52 or Final Crisis,
Sure.
And then I think my most recent one, I wrote a original Batman novel, Court of Owls, for Titan a few years ago, which was a sequel to the Court of Owls whole saga.
Right.
So
that's
in terms
great.
of favorite authors, I do Steve Englehart, Marshall Rogers stuff was wonderful. I actually snuck a reference to the Laughing Fish into my Court of Owls book. I'm not
that's
sure
great.
Any continuity anymore, but it's like, the hell with it. I'm going to mention the Laughing Fish, because I love that story.
Everybody,
I'm having my senior moment now. The original Ra's al Ghul stories by Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams.
Yes.
I love those. One of my all-time favorite Batman moments is the moment where Batman's been left for dead in the desert, and he suddenly bursts into Ra's al Ghul's, bare-chested, and Ra's al Ghul loses his cool.
Yep.
You pursue? Are you pursue me beyond your dying? Are you a man or fiend from hell? I love that moment. That's one of my.
I'm with you. I remember it well.
Moments, so.
That's great, man.
I love the first Tim Burton movie. It's possibly my favorite Batman movie because I just love the whole pulp gothic mood and ambiance. It's like Dracula as done by Hammer Films. It's wonderful. Okay, the Batmobile zooming through the autumn woods with the leaves blowing in the background, and the Joker's bleached, white hand rising from the toxic pool. It's just,
oh yeah.
Yeah, I'm a horror movie buff as well, so that's my sweet. So that's my sweet spot. I should, the Spectre is possibly my favorite DC character because he's a superhero and he's a spooky ghost thing. So it's horror meets superheroes. That's my sweet spot.
I'm a massive fan. Stephen Commander, nice words about one of your adaptations. He says your version of Countdown from DC is far superior than the original weekly series. He also says Ray Palmer is my favorite DC character, and his arc was far more heroic.
Well, I don't want to badmouth the Hand That Feeds Me or all the people who worked on Countdown. I will say the challenge of writing 52 and Countdown, because those are big sprawling storylines.
Yes.
Besides the 50 weekly issues, for those who don't remember, those were 52-part miniseries, and besides the 52, each of them all had spin-off. Ron Thonagor War and special spin-off issues. And if I had an advantage, it was I kind of had to, because I had to write, if I tried to write a literal novelization of 52 or Countdown, it would be I would still be writing it. It would be the
War and Peace. Yeah.
And in fact, I remember realizing early on writing 52 that even Infinite Crisis, which had all these special Infinite Crisis tie-ins and series and sub-series, and okay, I can, I'm going to be writing this for the rest of my life. The book is going to be, because remember, I mean, 52 was 4 volumes as a graphic novel. That, okay, the only way I'm going to do this is I'm going to have to radically condense.
Sure.
And I joke that these are the Reader's Digest versions. But maybe that may mean, like in my case of Countdown, which had umpteen storylines and characters and 5 zillion characters, I'm going to try to be merciless here and honestly, I was merciless. I cut out entire subplots, so, it may read that, like I said, it's much more straightforward. It's not. And meanwhile, off his face with Adam Strange and Starfire, and meanwhile, there's a storyline here. And I admit I played favorites, because this is where it's like, okay, there's a whole subplot involving Lobo. I'm not a Lobo fan. I'm sorry. He doesn't. So, boom, Lobo is gone. But also there's just trying to figure out who the main characters were. Okay, Countdown. Jimmy Olsen is probably. I'm going to focus on the Jimmy Olsen storyline. I'm going to just focus on the Harley Quinn storyline, and anything that isn't related to those is going to fall by the wayside.
Sure.
And there was stuff that I read it. I mean, I think somewhere in Countdown, you had Black Canary's bachelorette party, and I would have loved to write that, but really it had nothing to do with the main narrative. So, poof, So if my Countdown, at least, like I said, had the advantage of it's not trying to bring in every single character in the entire DC universe. And hey, I'm a DC fan. And even I was relying heavily on Wikipedia. And suddenly Lagoon Boy comes in. Who the hell is Lagoon Boy?
I had never heard of him either.
Yeah, thank God for the DC Encyclopedia. Yeah. So one of my rules of thumb writing those miniseries, there were 4 of them, was if a character's only role is to be part of a big 2-page splash page, and they're flying through the screen, and they go, look, over there. Okay, they don't need to be in the book.
I'm with you.
So yeah, those were interesting projects because usually when you're writing a novelization of a movie, you're trying to expand things. You're taking a 100-page script and trying to flesh it out. When you're adapting a 52-part comic book miniseries, you're mercilessly trimming down to just what's essential to the plot. Okay. Oh, look, there's a cameo by, Blue Beetle flew in for 3 pages. Bang.
Sure.
Nothing. I guess maybe blew up Beetle. I don't know. And again, I showed faith. Like I said, I love the Spectre. So yeah, all of the Spectre scenes make it into the book. Okay. Detective Chimp, he absolutely makes it into the book.
I get it. Stephen points out when the question Vic Sage died in your novel, it actually moved me to tears where the comic fell flat.
Well, thank you very much. Like I said, I am proud of those books. I'm particularly at 52. That was a big, ambitious job, and there was trying to keep track of all stuff like that. Taking this big, sprawling, interconnected, affecting everything in the entire DC universe crossover saga, and boiling it down to a 300-page novel that had a beginning, middle, and an end. It was basically the job, and it was tricky, but I'm happy with how those books turned out, and I enjoyed doing them. They were an interesting challenge.
Do you have other?
I was writing books as the miniseries was coming out. I didn't know how it ended.
Wow!
I written a book before I didn't know where it ended.
Crazy.
They were sending me care packages every week of the art of the scripts of the issues. Oh, I will incidentally throw in a plug because I give credit where it's due. Greg Rucka was very nice. At one point, I called Greg Rucka, who was involved in 52, and I said, "Hi, can I pick your brain? Because can you please tell me about this new Batwoman? Because I did not know this character.
Sure.
And Batwoman was largely Greg Rucka's baby.
Absolutely, it was. Yes, indeed.
And so I basically called him up and said, "Hi, can I pick your brain?" And he talked to me for a half an hour and told me, in fact, lots of stuff. Hi, Greg, here's lots of stuff about her background. And if you tell anyone about this, I'm going to track you down and break your legs in a nice way. But and I think actually Grant Morrison, when I did Final Countdown, and that was a very complicated story. There were a point where I'm not sure what's going on. And I wrote an email to Grant Morrison and he wrote me back. Yeah, I keep stressing the point, and this is the theme of tonight's thing. When you're doing tie-in books and you're doing IP, and this is one of the funs of it. It is a cooperative process. You're adapting other people's characters. You're adapting a story. You're doing a movie novelization. You're working with the movie people, the TV people, using their scripts, and there's back and forthing. And I try not to abuse the privilege. But I will get on the phone and say, "Hey, I don't understand this part. Can you explain this? Or can you please tell me what the hell this looks like?" Because the thing about novelizations, and I'm going to stress this point because you brought it up, that people don't tend to get is I don't see the movies until they show up in my multiplex. Because the books have to hit at the same time the movie. I'm writing the books while the movies are being filmed.
Certainly.
This stuns and confuses people. And there's like, well, why is your book different? Well, because I jokingly describe the job as writing a 300-page description of a movie I haven't seen yet.
Right.
I'm working from an early version of the script, plus some stills and whatever pre-production art I can pry out of the studio.
Sure.
I go to the movie theater and wow, I remember when I was young and naive and I did Daredevil, I remember it was a bit of a shock because I wrote Daredevil based on the original script. And the theatrical version of the movie was very, very different. And I remember seeing the theater kind of the first time through, just like, oh, they moved that scene around, and oh, that entire subplot is gone, and oh yeah, wow, and oh, this is how it works, So that was.
I get it.
Because the theatrical version. I know I got it. They put out a director's cut since, but yeah, the theatrical version of Daredevil cut out entire subplots and characters who were in my novelization. And that's just
Coolio. Yeah, Coolio has a great subplot. That
I thank God they didn't make me cut that stuff out of the novelization because the book would have been much skinnier. But this is part of the process.
Sure.
Oh
no, and again, that's what makes a lot of novelizations and adapted from a regular IP. That's what makes them interesting. But it's especially the novelizations that sometimes are different. Again, I had a very long conversation with Max about that, Collins. And
I have a funny story about Daredevil. After the Daredevil came out, I got a very nice letter from a concerned mom who thanked me for having the good taste and decency to leave the sex scene out of the novelization. I did not have the heart to tell her that the sex scene was added in reshoots. It wasn't in the original script. I would have added it if I'd known about it, but
Funny.
but
That's funny.
In fact, and it goes the other way in Underworld, and I did the novelization of the first Underworld movie. There's a sex scene in my novelization that was in the original script that didn't make it into the final movie. So, but yeah,
Some of the other
emails like, why did you leave out the best part? Because it wasn't in the script,
Underworld. You said Godzilla. You've done Godzilla stories.
I did the Godzilla 2014 novelization, the first of the new Godzilla movies.
Sure.
The one with Bryan Cranston and.
Yes, of course. My good friend Matt Fraction co-created the Monarch TV series that was on Apple.
I have a story about that. It's a small.
Please.
I remember when I was writing that book, Monarch was part of the plot.
Sure.
At that time, they had not cleared the name. They weren't sure they could call it Monarch because you got to do some sort of copyright trademark search to make sure there isn't actually a Monarch company in Glasgow to sort of sue you for making you an evil, a secret, top secret, covert monster hunting organization. So I remember right up to like the last minute, I was told, hang on, Greg, it may just be a mysterious unnamed monster hating organization. And I think we were like into, the copy edits when I got a letter from Sony saying you can use the Monarch name. Okay, and I can go in and use the name Monarch. But that was right up to like the copy editor of the galleries. They were still trying to get a legal clearance on using that name.
You were telling me before we started recording that you did the Librarians, and are you doing something new with the Librarians as well?
Not at the. Yeah, I hope to. I did 3 Librarian novels based on the previous TV series.
Second one, yeah.
Yeah, the second. Yeah, there were the original. For people who don't know, we talked about this earlier. There were the original movies with Noah Wyle, and then there was a later TV series starring Rebecca Romaine. It was basically the Librarians, the Next Generation. They didn't call it that, but it was a second team. And there's a new Librarians series called Librarians. I think the new chapter coming on the CW this fall. I have not been contacted about that. We were waiting. A lot depends on whether some publishing company decides to pick up the license and publish the books. I have a very good relationship with Electric Entertainment, who are the people who I wrote Leverage for them as well. I did a Leverage novel for them. No, I'm Dean Devlin and that whole crowd. They were a pleasure to work with. I have a very good relationship with the Electric. If a book line of the new Librarians comes along, I would love to do it. One thing I'm going to stress is that the whole media tie-in thing is a weird world if people don't understand it. And this is something I explain on panels all the time is, these projects are never initiated by me. I don't wake up in the morning and decide, I'm going to write a Winona Earp novel, and then somehow I arrange to get it published somehow. No, what happens is, some company, Pocket Books, Tor, Del Rey, Rock, Titan, has to do a deal with the TV studio to publish 6 Winona Earp novels, at which point they will then open up their Rolodex and call one of the usual suspects.
Sure.
I am fortunate enough at this point to be one of the usual suspects. But yeah, people are, you should write another Librarians book. I'm like, I would, but it was a 3-book deal.
Right.
And even the Electric people can't just say, Greg, write us another Electric novel, because they're not a book publisher. They have to have a publishing partner. Tor Books, and this is not telling you, this is just how, Tor Books did a deal with Electric to publish 3 Librarians novels.
Sure.
They then hired me, and generally they, ran my name by the folks at Electric, and they were probably like, oh, we know Greg, he did Leverage, And I wrote the books, and they were published, and we were all very happy. Now, somebody has to now pick up the license to
the next show.
Yeah, and that's the same thing. It's kind of like almost all of my tie-in jobs begin with someone calling me up and saying, Greg, we are doing Alias novels. What's your schedule like? Greg, are you interested in doing a Godzilla? What's your novelization?
Sure.
What's your schedule like?
Sure. Are there new without? And again, I don't want you to spoil if the marketing plan is to announce it later. But are there other tie-ins that you are in the midst of working with?
Not at the moment. And like I said, sometimes you aren't allowed. I'm honestly itchy to write a new novelization. My last novelization was for War of the Planet of the Apes. So hey, I'm available, folks. You know, at the moment, Star Trek has been keeping me busy. I wrote the new novel. I've been, like I said, writing regularly for the magazine. And like I said, I wrote the not yet to be named original novel, where at the moment I'm waiting to hear back the editorial notes from the publisher.
Okay.
They bought the books a few months ago. I'm now waiting for their comments. And that was a very weird deal because, like I said, that's my first original novel. This is the only time that, like I said, I wrote a book the way most authors write books. I.e., I sat down, I wrote the book on spec. I've been spoiled. You know, almost all my books begin with, "Hey, Greg,
Sure.
we need a Planet of the Apes novel by October. What's your schedule like?" In this case, no. I actually wrote a novel. I sent it to my agent. He sent it around to publishers. It took a while. There were a couple of rejects. We found a nice publisher, and it's going to happen. Which is how 90% of all real book of non-tie-in books write. You work. Some author comes up with an idea, writes a book, and they sell it. Or they send it around. And try to find a publisher. Whereas my case, I know, I'm going to write a Star Trek novel because Pocket Books called me and said, "Hey, Greg, we want a Star Trek novel, and it's going to be published by Pocket Books." And I would never write a Star Trek novel on spec because if Pocket Books didn't want it, there's nowhere else to sell it. And again, it's a process where you write a 12-page outline, etc. Yes.
No, I get it.
The original novel, I actually had to sit down and write the whole novel. My agent had to explain this to me, Greg. You've been spoiled. You can't sell an original novel based on a 12-page outline, because you.
Right. Sure.
And I'm like, but New York Times bestseller. You don't have a track record with original novels. You write Star Trek novels. So I actually had to find time to sit down and write 130,000 words, full-length novel, and then I sent it to my agent, and he peddled it around, and we found an author. And that is how non-time books work. And like I said, it's very different. I have to explain to people, well, I would love you to write another Underworld novel. I would love to write another Underworld. If ever Sony or Lakeshore Entertainment wants to call me in, I don't own these characters,
Stephen points out some DC things he'd love to see you write. The Janus Directive, Suicide Squad, Checkmate, and Manhunter versus Cobra. All very interesting ideas.
I admit I was disappointed I didn't get a phone call for Blackest Night. I would have had fun writing all the zombie superheroes,
I bet. Yeah, really horror and superheroes, sure.
No, the last DC thing I did was, like I said, Court of Owls, and that was a lot of fun. And I'm blanking now on the guy who invented the Court of Owls. We're talking about people.
Oh, it was Snyder.
Yes, him, right. And obviously Scott Snyder. Yeah, his fingerprints are all over my Court of Owls novel. I went back and I reread those original comic books over and over and over and over again.
Would you ever want to write comics themselves?
Definitely. Oddly enough, I've never done that. There's been a few times where this has been floated in the ether, or either the timing didn't work out. I've approached people. It's very strange because I've been writing superheroes since 1992. I've done Batman. I've done the Green Hornet. I've done the Phantom. But never actually wrote an actual comic book with word balloons. Have you heard of word balloons? Yes.
Vaguely. Yes.
I have done prose versions.
Yeah.
I guess I don't know if I'm typecast. At one point I was approached by Dark Horse, to do something because I had a friend who was an editor there, but she's long gone now. Yeah. Who knows? It may happen one of these days. It's strange how this works. It's like Superman. Superman and I were like ships that crossed in the night for years. I was approached about doing a Lois and Clark tie-in, but for reasons it didn't happen. Scheduling issues, whatever. And I actively pursued Smallville. I actually, even kind of cornered an editor at a party once and said, "Hi, I'd really love to write a Smallville book." But it never happened. So it seemed like, and there was a Marty Greenberg anthology, The Further Adventures of Superman. I submitted a story to, and I can't even remember why that didn't happen, but it.
Okay.
So it seemed like, okay, Superman and I are destined never to happen. But then, I ended up writing Infinite Crisis and Final Crisis and 52 and Countdown and Man of Steel. And so,
Yeah.
all things come with it's sort of a strangely random stuff. People do say, Greg, why don't you write Winona Earp? Why don't you write a Xena book? It is not up to me.
I understand.
Yeah. So,
Stephen is suggesting you pitch a Spectre series. Sure.
Yeah, I would love to do.
Why not?
Thankfully, I finally did get to write the Spectre in Infinite Crisis, Final Crisis, etc. But yeah, I love the Spectre. I should,
I'm a big Spectre fan
I
as well.
sent out feelers occasionally to try to write comic books, and I've occasionally been. It's a lot depends on timing and scheduling and the timing. Who knows? Like I said, it will happen someday.
I get you, man.
Superman,
regardless,
like I said, kept, passing like ships in the night for years, but we finally connected. So maybe one of these days, someone will call me up and do. I'm not sure I can talk about it yet. I recently edited a graphic novel. This opens a whole can of worms. I actually am a writer. I do a lot of freelance editing on the side too, and I was a full-time editor at Tor Books for years. So, yeah. So I actually started out, as I joke, on the other side of the desk. I edited a lot of tie-ins. The very first novelization I ever wrote, I edited the novelization of Wes Craven's New Nightmare, a Freddy Krueger book. I edited the Farscape novels for Tor. God help me, I was the guy who thought it was a good idea to buy up all the book rights to Cutthroat Island, the biggest flop in Hollywood history. Yes, yep. I edited the novelization of Cutthroat Island.
Whoops.
I am perversely proud of having, been the only editor in New York City who had the smarts to snap up the book rights to Cutthroat Island.
Hilarious.
You win some. See, I did the novelization of Steel. I edited the Shaquille O'Neal movie.
Sure.
Again, that seemed like a good idea at the time. Okay.
Well, no, I understand. Here, Mike.
It seemed like a good idea at the time, but you win some, you lose some. Oh,
Mike says outside of the DC events, he really enjoyed your novels using leverage librarians.
For both done by Electric Entertainment, so they're the same people. When I said I have a good relationship with Electric Entertainment, yeah, I did a leverage book for them, and I did 3 librarians with them. And, yeah.
God, I love their new series. Oh, yeah. That's on Sci-Fi Channel, The Ark.
Oh, I love The Ark too. I refer to it as the ship where everything goes wrong. It's like a never-ending disaster movie in space.
Yes.
Season premiere Wednesday night. I'm there. Trust me.
Yes, I know. I'm excited too, man.
And yes, if anybody wants someone to write Ark novels, I'm on board. Hey, I love The Outpost too. Do you remember The Outpost?
No, tell me.
Oh, The Outpost was another Electric Entertainment production.
Oh.
It was a fantasy series about a warrior woman. It was kind of a throwback to the syndicated fantasy adventures of the night, Xena, Hercules.
Sure.
It was a sort of sword and sorcery series. It ran on the CW for actually 4 or 5 seasons. Sadly, no one apparently picked up the book license. But no, that was also Electric Entertainment, who does leverage. And in fact, and I don't know her name, the woman who played Talon, the fierce warrior woman on The Outpost, is one of the new librarians on the Librarian's next chapter coming this fall on CW. So
sure, wow. Steve beat me to it. I was going to ask if you have heard and enjoyed the graphic audio versions of your stories, your novels.
I love that they make the graphic versions of stories. In fact, true story, as we were sitting here talking, up in the upper hand corner of my screen, I actually got an email telling me they finished the audio book of my new Star Trek novel. That it's finished now. I tend not to listen. I find it weird to listen to my own books. I love that they're out there. They're great jobs. I sampled them. I mean, it's kind of weird when listening to someone else read my own words creeps me out sometimes. Or also just the fact that I don't, by the time I'm done for book, I've wrote it edited, revised it, proofread it, copy edited it. I don't need to hear that story again, or maybe not until 10 years down the road. The other day, I dragged out an old short story I wrote 10 years ago because it's fresh enough that I didn't remember everything about it, But
That's great.
True story. Years ago, I was invited to sit in on the taping. I did, believe it or not, a Tales from the Crypt audiobook. Yes, there's no franchise. I am determined to leave no franchise untouched by my grubby little hands. They actually were very gracious and let me sit in on the taping. And I remember it was surprisingly, I was surprised at just how weird it was because in my head, I hear the voices different and the lines are different. The actors are their own. And I was very good and I sat there and kept my mouth shut because I'm not a prima donna. But I was like, oh, no, that. I heard the voice. I heard the lines delivered. It was very strange and weird to hear somebody else sort of take the words out of my typewriter and perform them on stage in front of me.
I bet. Yeah.
It was an interesting experience. But yeah. But no, I love that the graphic novels and people listen to the audiobooks. And again, I can tell you, Robert Petikoff is the guy who is the reader these days for these Star Trek novels. He does a great job.
Yes.
I've listened to samples and it's great. He does the voices, Chekhov, Kirk, Spock, very great. And I literally, as we were speaking, got a note from the audio people telling me, hey, great news, Greg, we've finally, locked down, finished the audiobook for Lost to Eternity.
That's outstanding.
My other role in the audiobooks is they always ask me for a pronunciation guide. At some point, I have to sit down and especially all the weird alien names.
Sure.
And I always say that knowing now that some poor soul is going to have to read this book aloud I am conscious of this. It used to be that I would, that zigzag, how do you pronounce XZZ? I don't know. It just looked good on the page. I am now conscious of the fact that at some point the nice audio people are going to come to me and ask me how you pronounce all these alien planets and names and worlds. And the poor Robert Petikoff is going to have to read them aloud.
That's great.
I am conscious of this now more than perhaps I used to be. But yeah, no, Robert Petikoff is doing the audiobook of Lost to Eternity, and apparently they just wrapped it. So cool.
Wonderful to hear. That's great. Again, everybody, the book comes out next week. Mm-hmm. It's Lost to Eternity, and sounds like it is a spiritual sequel to Star Trek IV. We get more into Gillian Taylor, the marine biologist's story, and more into Savik's story as well, in 3 different timelines. It should be very interesting. And I always trust in a Greg Cox novel. I've been a long-time fan, and as I told you, prior to us getting together, and really continued success, man. It's great to see that you're still doing Star Trek stuff and other adaptations as well. And again, you're new.
I'm still excited. It's funny. I've been doing this for 30 years. I'm still excited about it. My girlfriend can testify. I have been haunting our front porch, waiting for my author copies to arrive. Oh, yay! And the box arrives. I'm not like blasé. Another old Star Trek novel. I can do this. No. I get the exact one. I crack it right open.
There's nothing like it.
I am still thrilled to be writing Star Trek. And
I get it. I used to cover boxing, and every time one of my articles would be in a boxing magazine, the level of a euphoria that you get over that. And that's another thing. We got to look for Greg's short stories in. What is it? Star Trek Monthly? What's the magazine called?
The magazine is now called Star Trek Explorer, and in fact, since you're bragging it up, the next issue coming out, which is issue 12, they started the renumbering when they sort of rebooted the magazine a while back. Issue 12, which should be coming out in August, has a story for me in it, and it is in fact another Savik story, and it's sort of tangentially related to the new novel. In fact, they came to me and said, "Greg, can you write in the interest of synergy? To be clear, you can read my novel without reading the short story, and you can read the short story without reading the novel, but they wanted, and my connection was basically, I'll tell you what, this is a Savik book, well, how about I write another Savik story? So yes, I have a story about Savik and Sulu. It's a Savik-Sulu team-up, which was sort of fun because I suddenly realized when I went back and watched the episodes, they don't talk at all. I think they have like 2 lines of dialogue in the entire time Savik is around. So I thought it was fun to try to go ahead and flesh that relationship out because we don't see it on the screen. So yes, I have a story about Savik and Sulu coming out in issue 12 of Star Trek Explorer magazine. So yeah, and that was fun too. Again, at this point, I'm always looking for things I haven't done yet, and
Sure.
elements of the characters I haven't explored yet. So, and
That's amazing.
Pairing Savik and Sulu is something that hasn't been done, and something I haven't done. So that was a fun combination.
Very exciting, man. Well, again,
Yeah.
continued success,
Mm-hmm.
and please come back when your novel is ready. We could talk about that, or even earlier, whatever you want to promote, Greg.
What's that?
I said whatever you want to promote.
Can I throw in one last plug?
Please, by all means.
I should mention that, in fact, I and many other fine Star Trek authors, and Robin Curtis, who played Sophic, will be at a local convention, Shore Leave, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I can't remember the exact date, but the weekend of the 24th, 25th, 26th, here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is actually my hometown. Incidentally, I would like to say that I deliberately arranged for Robin Curtis to land in my hometown the week the book came out, but that's pure happy accident. So,
well, that's a good happy
your
accident.
local,
That's
come
wonderful.
to Shore Leave convention at the end of the month, and I'll be there. The
Yeah.
book will be there. I've arranged with a local bookseller to have the book there. Robin Curtis is there. If you want to buy the book and have Robin Curtis autograph it too, I will not complain. So
That's fantastic, man. All right, Shore Leave, everybody, in just a couple of weeks in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Beautiful, man. No, that sounds great. Again, I really appreciate the conversation tonight, Greg. And for my viewers and listeners, Tuesday night, I'll be talking to Marvel writer Steve Orlando about several of his Marvel books. So that's going to be a great conversation. On Thursday, I'm talking to J.M. DeMatteis, he of Craven's Last Hunt, and a lot of other things. He's got a slew of original comics that he's kickstarting, and we'll discuss that. We also know he did the new, from the DC Vaults, they've told a what-if story where instead of Jason Todd dying at the hands of the Joker, how the story would have unfolded if originally he had lived. And Mark is writing that story as well. So we'll be talking to him about that and a whole lot more. So that's that this week on Word Balloon Live. Thanks a lot for watching tonight. Stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.